Hey everybody, and welcome to the Ultimate Job Search and Career Podcast with Bill, the company's expert. And today I've got a couple of job interview question related topics for you. We're going to talk about the STAR method. You might have heard of this. The STAR method. What is it? Why would you use it? What question should you answer with it? And where you might not want to use it. So we're going to get into that. And also we're going to take a couple of questions from listeners/viewers that have sent in their questions by leaving comments under the video. So thank you very much for that. And we're going to be talking about what to do when they ask you, what have you been doing since your last job? What's the best answer for that? And what you probably should not say when they ask you that. So we're going to get into that. But first, I just want to thank everyone for watching, remind you to subscribe to both my YouTube channels, The Company's Expert, The Company's Expert 2. And also, if it interests you and it would serve you, check out my two courses. The first one is called Get Hired, where I take you through everything you need to know about how to get hired, whether you're going for an entry-level job or a higher-level job. That might be of interest to you. Follow the link in the description. And also my $100 MBA course. So if you are thinking of taking an MBA, but you're not sure if it's really right for you, or you just like to learn the material, you'd like to learn business, but you're not really interested in paying 5 figures and taking 1 or 2 years of your life to do it, my course might be an alternative for you. So check that out. Link in description. At least it will be in a few days when it comes out. So thank you very much. Okay, let's get into this. Now, the STAR method. You might have heard of this. Some people are real advocates of this and others are not. What this is, for those of you who don't know, it's a way to answer questions. Okay, STAR. It stands for Situation, Task, Action, Result. Okay, Situation, Task, Action, Result. You can tattoo that on your body somewhere. You get top marks from me if you tattoo that across your face. That shows you're hardcore, and that's always a good thing. STAR. Now, I like to use a variation of it called STARL. You put an L on the end that stands for learning. So situation, task, action, result, learning. Okay, situation, task, action, result, learning. Now, traditionally, this has been the format you use to answer behavioral-based questions. Behavioral-based questions are any question where they ask you to tell a story. Usually, these questions start with, tell me about a time, and then you fill in the blank. So, for example, tell me about a time when you encountered a problem and it was a big deal, but you overcame it. Or tell me about a time when you had to use creative thinking to do your job. Or tell me about a time that you had a conflict with your boss and you had to smooth out that conflict and move forward. Okay, so they could spring these types of questions on you. And the problem with behavioral-based question is that there's an infinite number of possible questions they could ask. Honestly, they could ask you about any situation imaginable. They would say, tell me about a time that, you encountered a problem and it didn't seem like a big deal, but then it turned out to be a big deal and you had to use your coworkers to help you figure out a solution, and your boss loved the whole thing and commended you for it. There you go. Tell me about that, right? They can ask any type of question. And if you don't believe me, I highly recommend you go to Google and you type in behavioral-based question and then the job title you're going for. And usually you'll have article upon article that gives you example after example of behavioral-based questions that could be pertinent to that role. Now, what you'll very quickly see is that there's so many of these, it's kind of impractical to try and rehearse and memorize answers for every single one. If there's a list of 70 different questions, and those are only the ones that they give you as examples, it's kind of impractical to try and think about how you would answer each one. So long story short, the way to prepare yourself for behavioral-based questions is while you're rehearsing or preparing for your job interview, pull out 10 stories from your past. Okay. These will be stories that are related to your previous work history. Okay. And if you don't have a lot of work history, it could also include your schooling. Okay. But some professional type situation, and pick out 10 of these stories. Okay. The rule of thumb I recommend is 5 success stories and 5 failure stories. Okay. So 5 success stories. These would be your 5 most shining moments, the accomplishments of which you are the most proud from your work history. Okay, so maybe you had to do you had to lead a particular project at the place where you work last, and you were the lead. You led a small team of people, and long story short, it was a great success. You accomplished the goals. Everybody recognized the fact that you did a really amazing job. Your boss complimented you, commended you. Maybe it resulted in some kind of promotion. Okay. That would be a perfect candidate to choose for one of your stories, right? So as I say, pick 10 of these. Okay. 5 are going to be your most shining moments, and the other 5 are going to be either failures, things that, you tried and it didn't work, or they're going to be things going wrong. So you having a problem with a coworker, you having a problem with the boss. What did you do? How did you overcome it? Okay. So you get 10 stories and you practice these stories. You have them on the tip of your mind. And the idea is that when you go to a job interview, any question that they ask you, that's a behavioral question where it starts with, tell me about a time when, fill in the blank. What you're going to do is you're going to pull out one of these 10 stories and tell that story. You might need to put a small twist on it. If they ask you, tell me about a time when you tried something and it failed, or it encountered, it required you to win over and persuade several people in the course of the project, but you did this. Tell me about a time when that happened. They'll pick some random thing, they'll ask you, and then you're going to pull out one of these stories and use that to answer the question. Okay. So for example, that's where you could maybe pull out the story of how you got promoted, one of your most shining moments. And you say, yeah, when I led this small team, in the beginning, everybody had their own ideas of what they wanted to do. And I had to convince them, I had to get everybody pulling in the same direction. And that was a big reason why we succeeded the way we did. And I was commended for leading the team very successfully, So that's the idea, okay? And when you go to give your answer, the problem is when you're telling a story, it can be hard to keep the story within a reasonable time limit, right? If someone gives you an open-ended amount of time to tell a story, that's pretty simple. Right? And you might take 5 minutes to tell the story. You might take 8 minutes to tell the story. If you're me, you might take 10 minutes to tell the story. I tend to talk a lot, right? And then the problem is you get more and more mired down in the detail. And then by the time you start to feel awkward because you've been talking for so long, you start to get self-conscious and you think, oh my God, maybe I'm boring. Maybe I've lost everybody. Then you try and wrap it up really quickly and it's just not very effective, right? So to help with that, there's this thing called the STAR method. That's what it's for. STAR. So this is the format you use to tell the story. Now, what can help is that if you do have a pad of paper and a pen or pencil in front of you, if you do have that during your job interview, some people don't, but I recommend that you take along a pad of paper, you have it in front of you, have a pen in your hand. You don't have to use it constantly, but just in case they ask you a long question with a lot of detail. It sometimes helps to just write a couple of words down. And as you're telling the story, you can just glance at those words and, oh yeah, I got to talk about this. It helps. So you can write STAR down on the paper. Now, when you come to tell your story, use the format. So S, situation. So you could say, well, this was 2 years ago. I was working at my previous job. My role was this, right? And, My function was that. Okay, something like that. That would be your situation. Task. My boss told me I had to lead this team and we had to do this particular project by a deadline. We only had a week to do it, so it was the pressure was really on, right? So that's task. So situation, task. Then comes action. So what did you do? Well, what I did was I'm making this up off the top of my head, just so you guys know. The first thing I did was I asked everybody for their opinion. I said, what do you think we should do? And what do you think we should do? And it became obvious that among the 5 people in this group, there were kind of 2 big ideas. 3 people wanted to do one thing. 2 people wanted to do this other thing. So we had 2 approaches that we could possibly use, right? And what I did was I tried to get everyone to choose one method. I didn't want to force anyone. I wanted to try and win everybody over so that everybody would agree the approach we took would be the right approach. And I took time to do that at the beginning so that there wouldn't be conflict later on. Okay, so maybe that would be action. So STA, situation, task, action, and R, result. How did it turn out? So what happened was we actually made the deadline. It was just in the nick of time. Everybody pulled together. We accomplished the goal. We gave the presentation. The boss was very impressed. This was something for customers. The customers in the end really liked what we had done. And I was promoted as a result of that. Everybody on the team was commended, and I was actually promoted. I was promoted into this position. So there you go, STAR. Now, this is a way of keeping your story on task so you don't go off into a lot of detail and that takes 5 minutes to say, right? Okay, and then it has all the essential parts so people can understand. STAR. Now, as I said, I like to add L at the end, learning. Okay, what did you learn? Now, with everything you do, you don't necessarily always learn a lesson. However, you could say what it reinforced, okay? That means what ideas that you already kind of knew, that this just gave you more proof that that's the right way to go. Okay, so at the end of the story, you could say, I was promoted, and this whole project, this whole experience, it showed me that it's well worth the time to communicate with people and get everybody's feelings and ideas at the beginning and resolve any conflict that might occur with that or disagreement at the outset. It might take some time, but it's well worth it because once you get started on the actual work, you work steadily and you make good progress. So that's what it reinforced. That's what it showed me. It proved that to me. Okay, so STAR, and then if you want to be like me, STARL. Excuse me. I have a little bit of a bug this week. But that's okay, because I'm talking for very long periods of time, and that makes it worse. Okay, so now that's the method. And as I said, traditionally, you would use this as a format when answering behavioral interview questions. Now, the question is, should you answer all questions using that format? Okay, so for example, they ask you a question like, tell me about yourself, or what are your strengths, or what are your weaknesses? Should you answer all questions like that? Should you say, my weaknesses? Well, this is my weakness here. And for example, let me tell you a story of me dealing with this weakness. And then you start explaining STAR, Now, I would say no. There are some people that they advocate for you answering all questions, basically, with a story. And I think the way that works is they say, answer the question and then give an example, to show that you really know what you're talking about. Okay, that is a certain logic to it, but I disagree because there are some questions that you don't want to spend a lot of time on, right? In particular, the weakness question. Okay, I've talked about that previously. I'm sure I'll talk about it again. It's something that people constantly wonder about. You might be in a job interview and they ask you, so what are your weaknesses? Or what is your greatest weakness? Right? Now, people feel put on the spot to various degrees, especially younger people. You're not really, you haven't had a lot of job interview experiences. It can be a bit nerve-wracking. You go into this big fancy place, everybody's all dressed up, they bring you into a room, and then someone you don't know asks you a pretty gruff, pointed question. They say, so what is your greatest weakness? And you're put on the spot. Now, this is the type of question you really don't want to go into a lot of detail. Because if you said, for example, oh yeah, well, let me tell you, I've got quite a few to choose from here. Well, number one, I tend to have a very quick temper. In fact, I've lost my temper many times on the job. For example, only last week, I was working in my current job, and a coworker told me if I could pass the coffee pot over to their desk, and it's not what they said, it was how they said it, and I lost it. I snapped like a twig. I threw the coffee machine at them, and the boss told me I needed to take a couple of days off. That's probably my greatest weakness. Well, congratulations. You have provided full and complete information. You have given the recruiters pretty much exactly what they were looking for, and you have successfully eliminated yourself as a candidate. Because now that they know this, the odds are they're going to conclude, well, I don't know if this is the right person to fill this role. So you've just talked yourself out of the job. So this would be an example of a question that I would recommend you give a polite, short answer and get the hell off that question, because the more you talk, especially talking off the top of your head, the more damage you're going to do yourself. Okay, the more risky it becomes, what you're saying will eliminate you. The more you talk, the greater the chance that you say something that will eliminate you. Okay, so for that reason, I do not recommend you use the STAR method on every question. Only on behavioral interview questions where you have to answer with a story. Okay? Now, the other possibility where you might want to use the STAR method is whenever you talk about a strength, you talk about something good. So, for example, they say, tell me about your strengths, or what's your greatest strengths, or a variation of that question where they say, why should we hire you? Right? All these questions you're going to answer with valid reasons why you're the most awesome employee that they've ever talked to and they should hire you. Right? You're going to tell them about what you have, what you know, what you've done, how much, the skills that you have, the useful experiences you have. You're going to show off your rock solid knowledge. You're going to show off your amazing soft skills, interpersonal skills, communication skills. You're going to show them how charismatic you are. And these are the questions you want to be asked, where they say, basically, give us a reason to hire you. That's what that question really means. Tell me about your strengths. Give me a reason to hire you. Okay. Now, in that case, you might say, well, I have the things you're looking for. You said in the job ad that you're looking for someone with this education. Well, I have that. I actually got that 5 years ago, and I've been building on it ever since. You said you wanted someone who has 5 years experience doing this particular thing. I have 8 years experience doing that. Right? So that's the way you would answer these type of questions. You'd basically go down the list of requirements that they've said they're looking for, and then you tell them how you have those things. Okay? You don't say things that you think are strengths, but they didn't specifically ask for. Because it's great that you think those are strengths, and they could well be, but unbeknownst to you, they don't really care about that. They're looking for the specific things that they said they were looking for, right? So in that type of question, when you're talking about the things that you have, it might be useful occasionally to go into whatever you're talking about, your point, a little bit deeper. And for that, you use the STAR method. They say, what are your strengths? Well, You say you're looking for someone with 5 years experience, in this. Well, I have that. I have 8 years experience. In fact, just to show you, the depths of my experience here. And then you tell a story. 2 years ago, I was doing this, I was doing that. I was in that situation, in this role. Task, I was asked to do this. Action, I did this. Result, it worked. Now, that's experience that most people don't have, right? I've gone sort of next level on this stuff here, so I feel I'm very experienced in this. And if ever you're looking for someone who can do that, I'm your guy. So you might want to use the STAR method to back up a very important point, but that's up to you. I wouldn't say it's required, but you could use it. It wouldn't be a horrible idea. I wouldn't try and do this with everything you say, because then you'd run out of time. I recommend basically you use this method for behavioral interview questions. Okay? And you can add the L, the learning thing at the end. What did it teach you, or what did it reinforce? And you can occasionally use it on other questions, especially if they're questions where you're talking about your strengths. You want to drive home the point that you indeed have something. Okay? For example, if they say, well, tell me about your technical skills. And you say, oh, yeah, I have all the technical skills. Well, that might not be very convincing, right? So to give it more weight, you say, oh, yeah, I have all the technical skills required to do this job. For example, let me illustrate. A couple of years ago, I was in this role, and I was asked to do something that's very similar to this particular job that you're interviewing me for. And so I did this. It worked out great. And I gained that experience. What did I learn? I learned the essentials of this. What are the core priorities when in this role? So that's what I can bring to this job. So hopefully that makes sense. That's the STAR method. Okay? Primarily for answering behavioral questions, but can be used for other things if you really want to give it more weight. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now, today I have a couple of questions that some listeners sent in. I got 2 questions. The first question is from James. That's all it says, James. The person with one name. That's awesome. Maybe it's Mary James. I'm not sure. But it just says James. Now, James says, what's the difference in content between your YouTube channels? Why Companies Expert 2? Thanks. Well, for people that have seen my second channel, hopefully it should be, you might have noticed that on the second channel, it's full of videos like this where you don't actually see my face. It's more an audio commentary type channel. Whether I'm sort of reviewing an article and you see the article on the screen, so there is a visual, or it's like this, it's a podcast. And then my primary channel, of course, is where you see me talking. You see my face. You see me sometimes jumping around, as is necessary to talk about business, And that's why some of the greatest business people of all time have jumped around as they teach, right? So that's the difference between my 2 channels. So hopefully that makes sense. So thank you to James for saying that, or asking that. Now, I have another question here. And this individual has written a very long question. Unfortunately, I can't pronounce their name. But let's see if I could read this here. It says, thank you so much. I have a question. I completed my graduation in 2018 and prepared for government job after that. Now, even after 3 years, I haven't been able to crack the government services exam yet. I decided to change the path and started looking for appropriate job. A few days ago, I applied to a job in a private bank as a freshman, and I couldn't clear the interview. So I guess they couldn't pass the interview. I would like to share a question they asked me in that interview. The interviewer asked me, what did you do after completing your graduation from 2018 to 2021? Okay, so this person had said that they graduated in 2018, and during that time they were looking for a government job. They were trying to get hired and pass the government services exam. Okay, so they went on a job interview recently. Were asked, what have you been doing the last 3 years? Now, this person says, I replied with the truth and said I was preparing for government services. Okay, I see. So you were applying for private jobs in the meantime because you couldn't get a government job. And they asked you, what have you been doing? And you said, well, I've been preparing for government jobs. Okay. Yes. This is an excellent question. See, it's great that you're honest. Okay. They ask you a question. You're honest with your answer. You explain that, I've been applying for a government job. Now, these people interviewing you are a private company. They're not a government job. So basically, you're admitting to them, unfortunately, that, I've been trying to get a different type of job than this. Now, what they're going to conclude here is that, and the whole purpose of them asking this question is they're trying to see if you are a high-risk candidate, if there's any red flags about you. Okay, they tend to ask this question if there's a gap in your resume or a gap in your work history. If there's a gap, it says here that you've been out of work for a year. So a natural question is, what have you been doing this last year? Right? Now, if you say nothing, that's taken as a red flag because it raises the question, well, why aren't you employed? Maybe there's a reason why you're not employed. Maybe there's something wrong with you. We don't know. So they tend to view that type of answer as like a red flag. Okay. Now, the way to normally answer this question is if they ask you, what have you been doing since your last job, or since you graduated from school, if that's been a while ago. If they ask you this question, the correct answer is to say something that involves professional development. So, for example, you could say, well, I've been taking a few training classes. Okay. That would be low risk because that makes sense. Okay. If you said something like, well, I've been on maternity leave, or I've stayed home to look after some of my young children. I've recently had some young children and I've been staying home to take care of them. That is pretty benign. That's a low risk answer. Okay. Because it's understandable. It doesn't raise questions about maybe there's something wrong with you that suggests that, you're a high risk candidate. Right. If they say, it's been a year since you were last employed, what have you been doing? And you say, well, I've been trying to find a job, but I can't find one. Okay, that's not a good answer. That might be the God's honest truth. But unfortunately, if you say that, that raises questions about you. That suggests, well, you're unemployable. No one will hire you. And they think, well, is there a reason for that? Is there something wrong with you? Is there some questionable thing that's the reason why people won't hire you? We don't know. But it raises a question, right? Now, this is how recruiters and hiring managers think. Okay, some more than others, but this is generally, especially recruiters, this is how they think. Now, I know it's stupid. There are many people that are highly capable, highly talented. They'd make great employees, but through no fault of their own, just being a victim of circumstance, you haven't been working in, say, a year. Or however length of time, you know that, I know that, every reasonable person knows this, but I'm just telling you how recruiters think, okay, and how they react to these types of answers, okay? So, if you have been out of work, if you have a resume gap, okay, don't say that you've been doing nothing. Okay. Or don't say that you can't get a job. Okay. What you want to convey is you want to convey that, oh yeah, I've taken some time off and I've gone back to school and I've, improved myself and, or whatever, or my work-life balance was off previously and I've just readjusted that and now I'm ready to go to rejoin the workforce. Or, that's not the world's greatest answer, but it's not the end of the world. The point is, you don't want to raise questions about your suitability. Okay? So that's one of the things that's going on here when they ask this question. Okay? They're asking about a work gap. So we've dealt with that. The other thing that's going on here is that they've succeeded in getting you to admit that you want a different type of job than the one you're interviewing with right now. This individual has said, my plan was to get a government job. My goal is still to get a government job. I've been trying for 3 years to get a government job, but I can't quite pass this government services exam. So in the meantime, my sort of backup plan is to just find a job somewhere else, right? So you're admitting to this company that they're basically your backup plan. You don't really want to work for them. You're there because you need a job and, you're just hoping that they'll hire you and then you'll have something, right? But the assumption they're going to make if you say this kind of thing is that, okay, you're not really into this job. This is not your ambition. You're not really wanting to be here. And the further assumption is that if we hired you, you're not going to stick around long term. You're only going to do this temporarily until a government job opens up and then you're gone. So that makes you a higher risk candidate. We are looking for people that want specifically to work here, right? Now, I know what you're thinking. That might be a silly attitude, especially if it's kind of not really the world's greatest job. They're interviewing for someone to work at the gas station. They're interviewing for someone to work in the chicken rendering plant. Minimum wage, terrible conditions. Turnover is 100% every year, right? Might be a ridiculous expectation for people to be passionate about this job that they're interviewing for. Okay. But nevertheless, that's how recruiters think. Okay. So that's the other thing that's going on here. They're trying to check to see if this is a place you actually want to work. Okay. Specifically, right? Now, obviously everybody applying for a job, they're looking for a job. But the recruiters want to check to make sure that you want specifically this job and not another job. That's what they're checking for. And if the answer is no, you don't really care which job you get as long as somebody pays you. Unfortunately, that's the wrong answer. And a lot of times a recruiter will eliminate you based on that answer. So unfortunately, I'm not too surprised that they didn't select you for this, if that's what you said, because that's kind of a red flag. Okay, so all things being equal, that will count against you. So that's what's going on here. Okay, so next time, if they ask you, what was it? The question was, what did you do after completing your graduation from that? Like I said, a safe answer is to say, I was improving myself. I was taking additional training. Now, if that's not actually true, okay, here's what I'd suggest. You've been out of work for a year, or in this case, like 3 years, go and take a training course. It doesn't matter. Some free training course, a couple of days long, And then you can say, completely honestly, yes, I've been taking training. That's what I've been doing. Between jobs, I've decided to improve myself, pick up some skills, and then come back into the workforce with additional skills that will make me even more valuable to companies. Right? That's a good answer. Don't mention the fact that, your ambition was to do this other thing. Okay? As far as they're concerned, your ambition is to work for them. Okay? So you could even say something like, well, my original plan was to do this, but you know what? That just doesn't really, I learned that doesn't really have the appeal it once has, And quite frankly, I'm not really a process-driven person anyway. I'm much more of a results-driven person. So a private sector job would be a much better fit for me. And that's what brings me here. right? So that would be a much better answer. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce the name of the person that sent this in. Their name is written in a different alphabet, so unfortunately I can't pronounce that. But thank you very much for sending this in. It is a very intelligent question, and I hope that makes sense. So that's pretty much the end of these questions. So thank you very much for listening. You guys are awesome. Don't forget to check out my Get Hired course and my $100 MBA course. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions or comments, please leave them in the comments under these videos. If it's a short answer, I can reply directly. If not, I may bring your question onto the podcast and answer it on the air. Thank you so much. Have yourselves a great couple of days, and I will see you on the next video. Take care.